This is Jarrod Horak for the RunawayHorse.com, back with my final Breeders' Cup video this week. Earlier in the week, I did a preview of Breeders' Cup Friday, and this is part 2 of my Breeders' Cup Saturday. And my first Breeders' Cup Saturday video, which I posted earlier, I took a look at the first 5 Breeders' Cup races on the Saturday program. In this video, I'll take a look at the final 4 Breeders' Cup races on Breeders' Cup Saturday. Now, if you're interested in my annual 2-day Breeders' Cup full cards from Keeneland this year, Friday, November 4th, Saturday, November 5th, you will find those full cards at therunawayhorse.com on my sales page, Breeders' Cup Week. I will have a pre-sale beginning next week. And again, runawayhorse.com on my sales page, and I will, in the description in this video, I will provide a link for those full cards. Now, if you're interested in those full cards and you want to know exactly what you're going to be getting for your money, that's what I'm going to talk about in this section. I've done this in the other 2 videos, and I'll do it again. Now, we're going to toss up on the screen from last year's Breeders' Cup Saturday program my analysis from Del Mar Race 7, the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, 11 furlongs on the turf course. My primary contenders: number 6, Love, was my top choice. Number 8, Love's Only You, was my second choice. My 3 secondary contenders: Warlike Goddess, Pocket Square, and My Sister Nat. The next section, the wagers section, and in that section, in each of the Breeders' Cup races, I suggest a win wager, exactas, trifecta, and superfecta tickets. And then I also, if they offer a pick 5, a super high 5, I have those tickets as well. Now, in last year's Filly and Mare Turf, I gave out the exacta, Love's Only You, and My Sister Nat. And that $2 exacta came back and paid more than $300. So I had a nice score in that Filly and Mare Turf last year. The next section is the trends section. And in this section, I go through and I look at the historical trends of each of the Breeders' Cup races. Now, I go through and I look at the past winners, whether they were North American-based runners or overseas runners, which races that they prepped in prior to the Breeders' Cup, and looking at the connections, if they've had success in the Breeders' Cup as well, and maybe some of the running styles that have done well over the years in the Breeders' Cup races. So that all that information will be in the trends section. The horse comment section is next, and in that section, I analyze each of the Breeders' Cup entrants in all of the Breeders' Cup races. So I'll go through every horse on the Breeders' Cup program in those Breeders' Cup races. I will have analysis of every horse entered in those races. The next section will be the rolling double and pick 3 contenders, and I put those in order of preference. And then the rolling double pick 3 tickets for the Breeders' Cup. In that section, I have suggested tickets. And typically how I play those rolling doubles and pick 3s is I take my top contender in each of the races and then key that horse to all the other contenders that I have in the other races. And if the top choices are doing well, if I can get a few of those top choices winning throughout the day, there's a very good chance that I'll hit multiple doubles and pick 3s. I also have suggested pick 4 and pick 5 tickets. And in last year's Breeders' Cup, starting with race 4, that Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, my top 6-1 choice, CC, won that one. And then ending with the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, which as I said, my second choice, Love's Only You, won that. And then I hit the other 2 races as well, and I had that pick 4. So that pick 4, as you see on the screen, it was my suggested pick 4 tickets from last year, and that $2 pick 4 came back more than $1,000. I also had a $1,000 pick 4 on Breeders' Cup Friday last year. So hopefully we can continue that momentum and make some good money this year as well. Now I'm going to go through it with the remaining Breeders' Cup races that I did not cover in my other video that I will cover in this second part of my Breeders' Cup Saturday video. And the races that I did cover in my last video, I went through and I looked at the trends and talked about the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, the Dirt Mile, the Filly and Mare Turf, and then the Sprint. So those races I covered in my last Breeders' Cup Saturday video. So that leaves 4 Breeders' Cup races that I'm going to talk about, beginning with the Breeders' Cup Mile at 1 mile on turf. Now, looking at the last 10 editions of this race, horses that were based in North America won 6 times. Overseas shippers actually have captured the last 4 editions of the Breeders' Cup Mile. Space Blues won it last year. Order of Australia in 2020 at Keeneland, $148.40, a big long shot there coming in from overseas, winning at Keeneland. Then Expert Eye and Caraconte were the other 2 overseas shippers that have won the Breeders' Cup Mile recently. So looking at the recent trends, as I said, the last 4 winners were overseas, but then 6 years before that, they were domestic runners. So either way, it can go either way. We can have a horse win from overseas. We can have a domestic horse run and win the race as well. So but the recent trend from the last 4 editions, definitely trending toward overseas runners. Some of the riders that have done well in this race, John Velasquez has 3 wins in the Breeders' Cup Mile, and Joel Rosario, he won the 2016 Breeders' Cup Mile aboard Tourist, and then in 2019, Uni won the Breeders' Cup Mile for trainer Chad Brown. So that's a look at some of the recent editions of the Breeders' Cup Mile and some of the trends for that race. Now we will do the Breeders' Cup Distaff next, 1 mile and 1/8 on the main track. Last year we had a crazy result. We had the pace collapse, and it was just a heated pace, and anyone close to that pace was nowhere at the finish, kind of like the Kentucky Derby this year. So Marsh Lorraine rallied from off the pace at almost 50-1 odds. The Japanese invader got the job done there and lit up the tote in that Breeders' Cup Distaff. Now, the last year that it was at Keeneland, Monomoy Girl won in 2020 for trainer Brad Cox. And then the previous year that it was at Keeneland was back in 2015. Stop Charging Maria was the winner that year at Keeneland, and she was exiting a 4th place finish in the Personal Ensign Stakes at Saratoga. Now, Todd Pletcher has a couple Distaff winners, and he has the 2 horses to beat this year. Malathaat, his 4-year-old filly, last year's Kentucky Oaks winner, and then Nest hit the board in this year's Kentucky Oaks, but since then she's been in excellent form. She actually ran well in the Belmont Stakes, but her stablemate beat her there. And then in her last few starts, she's been untouchable. She romped in the Ashland Stakes at Keeneland earlier this year. Malathaat likes Keeneland as well. So you have the 2 stablemates in excellent form. They both have enough tactical speed to keep the leaders in their sights, and it could end up being a match race between Malathaat and Nest, the stablemates in the Breeders' Cup Distaff this year. In the Breeders' Cup Turf, at 1.5 miles, going back to 2001, 16 of the 21 winners of this race were overseas shippers. So this is definitely a race that overseas shippers have really thrived in. In the 2 years that it was run at Keeneland, in 2015, Found won it. In 2020, Tarnawa, and both of those horses were overseas shippers. So 7 of the last 9 winners shipped across the pond and won the Breeders' Cup Turf. So just based on all that information, it sure looks like an overseas runner should win the Breeders' Cup Turf this year. And if a US-based runner does do well, it's probably going to be a horse that's very good. A horse like Bricks and Mortar was in excellent form for Chad Brown, and he was able to beat the overseas runners in 2019. And then Main Sequence back in 2014 was an overseas transplant that had multiple wins in a row in North America prior to the Breeders' Cup Turf. Finally, we're going to look at the Breeders' Cup Classic, 1.25 miles on the main track. And in this race, you go back to 2014, 4 3-year-olds have won the Breeders' Cup Classic since 2014. Bayern, American Pharoah, Arrogate, and Authentic. Bob Baffert was the trainer of all 4 of those horses. So he saddled the winner in this race in 4 of the last 8 years. Bill Mott and Steve Asmussen have both a couple classic wins. But the horse to beat this year is obviously Flightline. He was outstanding. John Sadler had won this race with the Pacific Classic winner before, Accelerate. Now he has Flightline. Flightline's just in another league. He's definitely in a league of his own. His speed figures are just through the roof. He's earning some of the fastest speed figures that we've seen in many years in horse racing. And if Flightline just comes up and runs his race, doesn't make a difference what the other horses do. He's going to win. But for whatever reason, if he doesn't run his race, that will really throw this classic into wide open, and we'll have to see how it plays out. But Flightline's never been defeated, and right now, just based on his speed figures, if Flightline shows up, they're all running for second place. So that's a look at how the Breeders' Cup Classic has done. But a few quick other things. Now, Authentic and American Pharoah were the 2 Breeders' Cup Classic winners when it was at Keeneland, and both went wire to wire. So that won't hurt Flightline because he likes to be prominent throughout. So based on that, look for horses that show speed. Certainly not not a bad thing if a horse shows speed in the Breeders' Cup Classic, but it's all about Flightline this year in the Breeders' Cup Classic, most likely. And that will wrap up my look at the Breeders' Cup races this week. Now, I'll be back next week, and after they have the pre-entries, they're going to have the pre-entries next week, and then once we get those pre-entries in, I'll start to go through and I'll see the horses that have been entered or pre-entered in all the races, and I'll do some more videos, and I'll cover some more Breeders' Cup races in video format. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if you like this content, and that will wrap up this video. Again, I'll be back next week with some more Breeders' Cup races. Until then, good luck at the races.